Okay.
Okay, can we enlarge it? Let's see. Let's try to enlarge it.
Here you go. Huh?
Not very clear, is it?
Wonderful.
Looks. Huh?
This.
Let me go like
Drag
this.
it over to this
Oh,
side.
right.
You can enlarge it. You can enlarge it by
Okay.
going to options.
Is that not large enough?
Yeah, sure.
Even on this little telephone, it's big enough.
Okay, I'm going to print out some of these things for us to use here.
I don't know. Don, do we need it? It's here. Okay. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize so much for all of the technical difficulties. Tonight, we're ending our study of.
Let's hold sound off and back. What's in the background here? Somebody's talking.
Maybe mute yourself down.
Not just me.
Everybody, please mute yourselves. Okay. All right. Go like this if you can hear me. Okay. So we'll start. We'll begin. This is strange. Okay. When I'm at home doing it virtually, I already have it all worked out. In the beginning, it was hard at home, and then it became a cinch. Now we're trying it a totally new way, and I guess there's all kinds of complications at the beginning. But I do apologize for the technical difficulties and for the people who have been waiting. It looks like we have a solution. We can all see the text now, and we can all see each other, and we can start to study. We're going to study now the person who, in my opinion, is the most fascinating of all of the 6 great Jewish mystics that we built the semester out of. We began with Yehuda Halevi, the Kutar of Kook. You see that, yes, there can be things that are more fascinating even than the Kusari and all of the other figures that we've studied. We'll see that Rav Kook is very much a mystical figure, that his ideas are based on Kabbalah. It will even come out of the biography, which is the thing that we will now begin with. Okay, who was Rav Kook? Who was Rav Kook? Rav Kook was born in 1865. For the Americans, that's a big date. It's the end of the Civil War. But he was just born on that date. He doesn't remember it. And in any case, he was born in Poland. And nothing to do with the American Civil War. He was born in 1865 and he died in 1935. That's 2 years after Hitler came to power. And his lifetime spanned many of the greatest events in modern Jewish history, but he did not live to see the 2 most extreme and most horrible and wonderful events. Namely, he did not live to see the Holocaust, and he did not live to see the rise of the State of Israel. Now, Rav Kook was born to a very unique family. As you know, because of the stories that I told a couple classes ago, the big war of the Jews in Eastern Europe was the war between the Hasidim and the Mitnagdim. The Hasidim and their opponents, as we've talked about. And I told you the story that the Rav Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the author of the Tanya, went to visit in Vilna, the Vilna Gaon, and the Vilna Gaon refused to open the door for him. Okay, you remember that story, I hope. Well, Rav Kook came from a mixed family. Okay, what is a mixed family? Nowadays, mixed means all kinds of things. But in the 19th century in Jewish Eastern Europe, a mixed family was a family where the husband was from a Mitnagdic family. And he married a wife was from a Hasidic family. Okay, that was a mixed marriage. They were two known families, and this was a joining of the two opposing streams, shall we say. Later in his life, in his adulthood, here in pre-state Israel, Rav Kook used to keep two pictures on his wall. Two pictures. Pictures of whom? Of none other than Rabbi Schneur Zalman of Liadi, the first Rebbe of Chabad, whom we studied, and the Gaon of Vilna, his great opponent. Okay, he kept these two pictures on his wall, which is as good a way as any to begin to understand how Rav Kook was a personality who was able to find truth in many different worlds, and he was able to join opposing views together. And this comes out in almost every aspect of his work and almost every aspect of his life. Now, Rav Kook, like I said, was born in 1865. When he was 18 years old, in 1883, he was sent away to learn in yeshiva. Okay, to learn in what yeshiva? Well, today that's a question. But in 1883, it wasn't a question. You know why it wasn't a question? Because there was only one yeshiva that was the yeshiva. And that yeshiva was, maybe some of you even know, it was the yeshiva of Volozhin. Okay? The yeshiva of Volozhin was what's called the first modern yeshiva. By modern, it doesn't mean that the ideas are modern. It doesn't mean the ideology is modern. It means that the construct of the yeshiva, the way it's built, is modern. Pre-modern yeshivot were local institutions. Okay, each town, each Jewish town had certain people who were cut out to be Torah scholars. So there was a Beit Midrash, a Beis Medrash, right, where such people would come to study, and maybe there would be classes given there. Okay, that was a pre-modern yeshiva. You studied in the yeshiva, in the study hall of your own town. Okay, you didn't go to another town to study. Volozhin was the first modern yeshiva in the sense that it was a central yeshiva meant for Jews from all over Europe. Okay, that they would come from all kinds of different places to come and study there. What that meant, of course, was that there was a financial cost to it. In order to study in Volozhin, you needed to have someone pay for you to travel there and to live outside of town. And you probably don't have a job in Volozhin, right? So to eat, right, and to exist while you're studying in the Volozhin yeshiva, somebody has to support you, or you have to have the means of doing that. Rav Kook was given the means of doing that, and eventually it had to do with a shidduch, okay? After he studied for about half a year in the yeshiva of Volozhin, he was married to the daughter of a prominent community rabbi, not in Volozhin. And in that time, that initial time in the Volozhin yeshiva, he became aware of all the major intellectual currents in the Jewish world of his time. Because even though the Volozhin yeshiva was traditional in its outlook, the students were not necessarily so. Okay, famous people who studied in the Volozhin yeshiva, probably many of you are aware of Chaim Nachman Bialik, Micha Yosef Bedeshevsky, okay, many, and also Ben Zion Dinur, okay, the great historian and the Sarah Chinuch, and also the winner, I think, of the Israel Prize for either, I don't remember if it's for his history or for his chinuch. All of them were graduates of the Volozhin yeshiva. All of them were leaders of either secular or writers, okay, outside of a traditional framework. These were the kind of people not everyone was like this, but many of the people in the Volozhin Yeshiva were these kinds of people. Okay, the way it's told, tongue in cheek, is that the Vilna Shas, the great big tomes of Talmud that were published in Vilna and that were studied in the Volozhin Yeshiva, there's such big volumes. And part of what was great about having such big volumes is that inside the volume of Talmud, you could stick the book and hide the book that you were really studying, that you were really reading. Okay, and very often it would be Haskalah literature. Okay, Haskalah literature. Haskalah is the modern Hebrew term for emancipation. Okay, the literature of emancipation. The Jews were given emancipation in Central Europe and in Western Europe in the 19th century, and that caused all kinds of new intellectual currents in the Jewish world. Some of those intellectual currents were either very European and very, and even assimilationist, okay? Like Moses Mendelssohn is considered under the rubric of Haskalah literature. But a lot of this was the development of modern Hebrew literature. Okay? The roots of modern Hebrew literature are in Europe, okay? At the time of the Haskalah. And these are the kind of books that students in Volozhin would read secretly. Now, Rav Kook came from not just a traditional family, but a family of Torah scholars and a family in which the currents of the world of Torah were very, very strong. And he himself, to his dying day, he identified with that world. He did not become an assimilationist. He did not become a maskil, okay? And he did not become a secular Zionist. He did none of those things. And yet, all of those currents were open to him. They fascinated him. Not only did he find it intellectually fascinating, but all of these things touched his heart, okay? They meant a lot to him. These weren't ideas that he could take or leave. These weren't ideas that he argued with, engaged in polemics with. Rather, these were ideas that resonated with him deep inside. And yet, somehow, despite that resonance, he did not leave the world of traditional Torah. Okay? So he married and they had a child. I don't remember exactly how many years later, but it wasn't many years. His first wife died, and he was remarried to her cousin. Okay, and then there was also his famous son, Rav Tzvi Yehuda, was a daughter of the second wife. He became the rabbi of several communities in Europe before his life took a big turn in the year 1904, which is at the beginning of the second Aliyah. He was invited, it was a dream come true for him, he was invited to become the rabbi of Yafo, Jaffa, and the Moshavot, the small Zionist communities around the city of Jaffa. You might imagine that one of those small things eventually would become either Tel Aviv or the various environs of Tel Aviv. But in those days, the city was Jaffa, and he was invited to become the rabbi. This was a dream come true because love for Eretz Yisrael burned very deep inside of him, but that was a hard dream to actualize in 1904, and he was given the ability to actualize it. Now, before he made Aliyah in 1904, he was already developing some of his initial writings, okay? Some halachic, some about more thoughtful areas, okay? And sometimes he would even combine. He would write a book on a certain topic, both the halachic side of it and the hashkafic or philosophical side of it, which is something somewhat unusual in the world of halachic writing. Halachic writing is usually straight halachic writing, not with the philosophical side. It could be that in this type of writing, he was influenced by his teacher. His teacher was the Rosh Yeshiva, the yeshiva head of the Volozhin Yeshiva, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin. To abbreviate that in Hebrew, you get the initials Nitziv or Natziv. And that may remind some of you of a kibbutz. Anyone know which kibbutz? Kibbutz Ein HaNatziv, right? Yes. In the Beit Sha'an Valley is named after the Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin. Rav Kook's teacher, the Natziv, was also an unusual thinker in a number of ways. The first way had to do with all of these modern currents going around. What did he think about all of the students in his yeshiva who had all that Haskalah literature stuck inside their Talmuds? Well, what did he do with that? He, too, was influenced by these modern currents. And unlike many of the traditional rabbis in Europe up until the Holocaust, not only did he not oppose the Zionist movement, rather he was one of the earliest supporters of the Zionist movement. You might have heard of Chibat Zion, right? Chibat Zion, the love of Zion, okay? The first Zionist movement in Europe, even before the Zionist congresses, okay? And which led to the Aliyah of 1882. The Natziv was one of the founders of Chibat Zion, the Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin, and the teacher of Rav Kook. Another thing about the Natziv is that the Natziv did not write halacha the way that halacha is often written. Okay? It was common in Europe at the time that you used the halachic codes and you saw what the commentaries said, and then maybe you summed that up or you drew conclusions from it. Okay? In other words, you used the most recent authorities. Okay? You used the Shulchan Aruch and its commentaries. But you less went way back to the sources of the halakha and the Talmud, and even earlier sources like Midrash, halachic Midrash, okay? Early Geonic works, okay? This is not something that was done so often, but that is exactly what the Natziv did, okay? That is how he wrote halakha. Finally, to add even one more thing, the Natziv wrote a Torah commentary. Now, to write a Torah commentary is not so unusual. Lots of rabbis write the Torah commentaries. But usually, even today, and certainly in those times, the Torah commentaries are usually like sermons. In fact, sometimes they're just collections of sermons. Sermons are very nice. You need it for the crowd on Shabbat morning, right? Can't do without it. But a sermon is not always trying to get to the guts of what the biblical text is really trying to say. Sometimes you even try to get away from what the biblical text is really trying to say. It's not necessarily geared towards what's called pshuto shamikra, the plain sense of the biblical text. The Natziv developed a method for reaching the plain sense of the biblical text through, believe it or not, the Midrash. In other words, to try to break down the barriers between the written Torah and the oral Torah and show how when you dig deep enough, they're both coming from the same place. It was a very unusual kind of Torah commentary. It's an extraordinary Torah commentary, and it's justifiably well loved to this very day. It's one of the most important modern commentaries on the Torah. This was the teacher of Rav Kook. So now if you look at Rav Kook himself, you'll see that when he writes halakha, he doesn't just deal with the halachic side, he also deals with the philosophical side. And even when he deals with the halachic side, he doesn't deal so much, okay, does. Okay, he does deal with the codes and with the commentaries, of course, but that's not his only focus. He also goes way back to the roots of the halakha. Okay, so he was a halachist and a traditional halachist, and yet he did halakha in a more fundamental way than was common, like his teacher did. Okay, he also didn't leave halakha at that. He brought it together with philosophy to see where the roots of both of them come. One more book that Rav Kook wrote in this period before his Aliyah, before 1902, 1904 I meant, is a book that is called by the title Moreh Lenevuchei Hazman. Okay, the Rambam, as you all remember, wrote the Guide of the Perplexed, Moreh HaNevuchim in Hebrew. Rav Kook decided that in the 19th century, with all of these new intellectual currents, and with Jews becoming part of the modern world, with emancipation, with all of that, okay, that Jews needed a new guide of the perplexed, okay? And he wrote it in Hebrew. It was never published. It was never published. There's a whole controversy to this very day about Rav Kook's notebooks. What happens is that certain of his works were published during his lifetime, but the vast majority of it was kept by his descendants in notebooks. And the descendants were very, very jealous about who gets to publish it, and what should be published and what shouldn't be published, and how should it be edited. And there's some ideological factors in this whole thing too. Okay, even the things that were published in his lifetime, there seems to have been some ideological work on the part of his son or on the part of others as to what things can be said publicly, what things shouldn't be published, among the things that Rav Kook wrote. And the Rav Kook that appears in the books published in his lifetime is somewhat of a less radical Rav Kook than the things that appear in the totality of his writings. So this book was literally smuggled, okay? By smuggled, I don't mean that somebody stole it. By smuggled, I mean that somebody surreptitiously, is that the word? Copied it, okay? And then put it online anonymously, okay? Why? Because the family refused to let it be published. And this person thought, well, this is a book of Rav Kook. It has to be published. So it was underhandedly, okay, it was put online, and then eventually it was published in a physical form. And it gives you this book, The Guide to the Perplexed at the Time, gives you a good sense of what Rav Kook was feeling in his Volozhin and post-Volozhin period before his Aliyah about the Jews in the world that he saw around him. So that's until 1904. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol nihya b'dvaro. Now, in 1904, he makes Aliyah. Okay, he becomes the rabbi of the newer communities, meaning the Jews in Yaffo and the surrounding area. These were Zionists. Many of them may have been traditional Jews, okay, but they were Zionists. They were not what's called the old community, the old Yishuv, which was based in the old city of Jerusalem and in some of the newer neighborhoods that began to be built outside it, amongst which you all know is Masharim. Okay? Now, Jerusalem wasn't a place that was totally comfortable with Rav Kook. I'm talking about the Ashkenazic traditional Jews of Jerusalem. Rav Kook, for instance, gave his support to a school called Tachkimoni, which would have been a religious school in which secular studies were also taught. Okay? The rabbis of Jerusalem, to the contrary, they put out a cherem, a writ of excommunication, lest any Jewish school in Jerusalem teach secular studies. Okay? And so you have here the rabbi of the new community, that's Rav Kook, versus the rabbis of the old community. And this is a kind of friction that's going to exist until the very day that Rav Kook left our world. Okay? In the spirit, what? It still exists, but Rav Kook doesn't feel it personally in that way as he did when he was alive. Okay? Now, in this period, he wrote most of his published works. Okay, he was very productive during this period, not just in writing but also in leadership. Yes. Okay. So all of that lasted until 1914. It's a period of about a decade. Okay. What happened in 1914? What's the period of Rav Kook's life that lasted from 1914 to 1918? You can probably figure it out just by hearing the years. The First World War. What happened with the First World War? Rav Kook in 1914 traveled to Europe for no other reason, you're going to love this, for no other reason than to take part in a gathering of an organization called Agudat Israel. Who remembers what Agudat Israel is now that they're no longer called by that name in the Knesset? Nobody knows. Agudat Israel is the main organization for what we nowadays call the Black Hat Jewish world. Okay? This was an organization that was started by, actually, if I'm not, no. It was, what's his name? It was, begins with a B. The name is slipping my mind, the name of the founder of it. He was a German Jewish Orthodox journalist. And he initially was a Zionist even. But he eventually left Zionism and became committed to creating what we nowadays call the ultra-Orthodoxy. It was a combination both of the Menacdic world and the Hasidic world. They joined forces against the contrary forces of modernity. Okay? And these are the people who are represented in the Knesset nowadays by the title Yahadut HaTorah. Okay, if you saw a Gimel posted in Carmiel for the most recent elections, okay, that's the group that Rav Kook was going to meet with in Europe, to join their meeting. Why did he want to join their meeting? It's clear. He was public about it. He said, I'm going to join that meeting because this group represents the world of Torah. And therefore, I want to make every attempt possible to change the position that this group has taken against Zionism. He wanted to convince them to be either less anti-Zionist or more Zionist. That was why he went to Europe. So he went to Europe and World War I, or the Great War, breaks out. We thankfully never saw World War II. He was caught up. He spent most of the war in England. He was the rabbi of some communities in London. He had some adventures. Okay, one of his adventures was that there were English Jews, British Jews of the Mosaic persuasion, okay, who were offended by the very idea of the Balfour Declaration. Okay, and they were working to prevent the British government, okay, from issuing the Balfour Declaration. So Rav Kook went as the representative of the opposite point of view, okay, to help convince the British government to issue the Balfour Declaration. And some member of parliament, whose name escapes me also, okay, said, if I'm looking for a representative of the Jewish community, okay, should I listen to this rabbi or should I listen to some other, I guess it was some prominent British Jew who has pork in his home? Okay, and so he preferred the rabbi who didn't have a pork in his home as the representative of the Jewish community. And so Rav Kook had at least a certain role in the Balfour Declaration. Another adventure that Rav Kook had during this time of his life was that Rabbi Dr. Bernard Revel, who was the president of Yeshiva University in New York, invited Rav Kook to come to the United States. Okay, he traveled to the United States. He did fundraising. And those were some of his adventures. In 1918, he returns to pre-state Israel, to the Palestine Mandate, and he is offered the job of the rabbi of Jerusalem. Okay? Each time, people didn't want him to leave. When he left Europe the first time in 1904, all the wealthy people in the community tried to do everything they could to give him, an offer he can't refuse. But he left anyways to become the rabbi of Yaffo, which wasn't such a Jewish community, right? In 1904, and then when he was in England, he made a condition. He said, "I won't be the rabbi of any community unless it's understood that as soon as I am able to return, right, I will return." And he did. He comes back, not to be the rabbi of Jaffa and the communities, but rather to be the rabbi of Jerusalem. Okay? This period, the final period of his life, from 1918 until his death in 1935, this is the period where he writes less, or should I maybe correct that? Maybe he writes a lot in notebooks. Okay? He publishes less, but he's extraordinarily active in public, okay? Building institutions and building movements, okay? He started a youth movement, first of all. This is one of his most important ideas, but one that did not take off. Okay, he called it Degel Yerushalayim, the flag of Jerusalem. He started it as a youth movement for youth of Torah and the land of Israel, meaning that in the official religious Zionist movement, okay, he had trouble with the official religious Zionist movement. The official Zionist movement was one of the founders was Rav Linus, and he very much set its future ideology in motion. The idea was that Zionism and redemption have nothing to do with each other. Okay, that we all pray for the Messiah to come, and we plead with God to send to give us the redemption, and yet, okay, Zionism is a political tool in order to solve a practical problem of the persecution of Jews all around the world. And that is why, so this may shock some of you if you didn't know, that is why the official position of the Mizrahi movement supported the Uganda plan. When Herzl said that Zionism should be realized in Uganda, okay, you'd expect the religious Jews, right, the Jews who pray for Jerusalem 3 times a day and all of this, you'd expect them to oppose it. It was Davka, okay, Davka, the religious wing of the Zionist movement, that supported Herzl, okay, in the Uganda plan. Why? Because Zionism is not redemption. Zionism is not the Messiah. Zionism is not building the temple. Zionism is simply finding a practical solution for persecuted Jews. And if you can do that in Uganda, then do it in Uganda. Okay? On this, they agreed with Herzl completely. Rav Kook was so offended, not just by this particular position, but by the very idea that Zionism and redemption have nothing to do with each other, that he always had a troubled relationship because of that with the political religious Zionism, and that's why he tried to found his own youth movement. He was basically trying to create a second kind of religious Zionism, okay? A religious Zionism that would have Torah and Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, and modernity, all of that together, trying to bring the Messiah through it. Okay, he wanted Zionism and redemption to be connected. So that was his youth movement. Other institutions that Rav Kook builds at this time, one of them was his yeshiva. This is what he raised money for when he was in the United States. He created a yeshiva that he called the Central Universal Yeshiva. That was the official title of it, okay? It was meant to be a yeshiva like no other yeshiva in the world, okay? Where the yeshiva students would be studying not just Talmud, but also Bible, and also Jewish philosophy, and that they would study it in an open way and in a fundamental way that would help them, how shall we say it, develop Torah ideas that would be able, how do you say litmoded in English? It would be able to stand up against, okay? What? To cope with, thank you. That would be able to cope with the challenges of modernity, okay? It's really a question whether the yeshiva actually lived up to Rav Kook's expectations for it, okay? It's the yeshiva that nowadays is called Merkaz Harav, okay? If you go to Jerusalem, okay, it's about a 5-6 minute walk from the central bus station where that's not the original building, okay, but that's where it's been for many, many decades. His son also was an important leader of that yeshiva, his son Rav Tzvi Yehuda. So he created a new, at least in its potential or in its vision, it was supposed to be a completely new kind of yeshiva. There are other things that Rav Kook did, but we cannot finish without mentioning the most important one. And that is, I think some of you must know, what was the greatest institution that Rav Kook created? Who knows? The Zoom people can speak up if they know. Something all of you are aware of, something that some of you sometimes makes you want to scream. The chief rabbinate of what eventually became the state of Israel. Okay? This was Rav Kook's idea. Rav Kook's idea was that in order to create the love of Torah, there first has to be respect for Torah. And in order for there to be respect for Torah, there needs to be a modern rabbinate with far-seeing and what? We're getting some reactions here at Kilat Kerem in the meeting hall. You in your bedrooms or your kitchens at home, I don't know if you're having the same reactions. Rav Kook's.
Absolutely.
What?
There's nothing modern about the rabbinate that we have now. I wonder if Rav Kook wouldn't be turning over in his grave if he could hear and see the things going on here.
Okay. I don't know if you could hear what Don said. Don said that there's never been an institution that has driven more people from Judaism. We're not going to talk politics today, but yes, it is possible, definitely possible to ask, what would Rav Kook have thought about what the chief rabbinate of Israel eventually became? The one thing that we said with a great amount of certainty is that this is not what he describes in his vision. Okay? His vision for it was to be something that would develop Torah and develop Torah life to such a degree and with such, that would be so impressive that people would be drawn to Torah and would be drawn to Judaism and would come to love it. That was his vision for the chief rabbinate of the of what by the way he called it the state of Israel even before there became a state of Israel and even before it was given that name. It just occurs to me now. I don't know if anybody noticed that in the Friday edition of Yisrael Hayom, they have a section, or 70 years ago, I guess. And in that section, they had a little, it was really cute. They had a blurb on who came up with the name Medinat Israel. And it turns out it wasn't necessarily Ben Gurion. Okay, you can go find it on the internet and read
it came in very unclear.
So whatever they said in Yisrael Hayom, I actually don't remember who they said it was, but already before 1935, Medinat Israel. Just the main point. Long before Ben Gurion and long before whoever decided that would be the name of the state. There were other competing names. Some people wanted to call it Yehuda. Some people wanted to call it, in quotes, Eretz Israel. Okay? But Rav Kook was already calling it Medinat Israel long before that. Okay. So Rav Kook becomes the first chief rabbi, not of Eretz Israel, not of Medinat Israel, but of Eretz Israel. If you've seen like the old British Mandate coins, it says in Hebrew letters Palestina, and then in parentheses Aleph Chukchik Yud, which stands for Eretz Israel. Right? So he became the first chief rabbi of Eretz Israel. It's there that the business of Ashkenazic and Sephardic began. Why Ashkenazic and Sephardic? Because long before Rav Kook came up with the idea of a chief rabbinate, there was already for hundreds of years, okay, a rabbi of the Jews of Jerusalem and basically Eretz Israel. He was called the Chacham Bashi. The Chacham Bashi is a position that existed for centuries, okay, but it was a Sephardic position. When the Ashkenazic Jews came to Jerusalem, it was alien to them, and they didn't see it as representing them. Okay? So the non-Ashkenazim had a Chacham Bashi. Rav Kook wants to create a chief rabbinate, right? So you end up subsuming the Chacham Bashi into the chief rabbinate. Okay? And that is exactly what happened. If you've ever known, I don't know if you've paid attention to it, any of you, but the Sephardic chief rabbi of the state of Israel has always been called Harav Harashi V'Harishon L'Tzion. Has anybody ever paid attention to that? The Ashkenazic rabbi is not called Harishon L'Tzion. Harishon L'Tzion is a Hebrew, okay, way of saying the Chacham Bashi. Because this older institution was subsumed into a major institution. Okay. I think that's enough for now. Okay, there's other great projects of Rav Kook, and Rav Kook was an immensely productive human being. Okay, in almost every possible way you can imagine. I guess the one thing that should be added is, certainly based on what I just said a moment ago, is that it was Davka the Ashkenazic Jews, the Haredim, who did not accept the position of the Ashkenazic chief rabbi of Eretz Israel. And in Jerusalem, Rav Kook faced much more friction than he ever faced in Yaffo. Much of it was extremely ugly, okay? And anything you can think of in terms of controversy, and people can belittle each other and treat each other in awful ways. All of that existed in the friction that existed against Rav Kook in Jerusalem. It also goes to show, I'll make this contemporary and make I'll express a personal opinion just for a moment, okay? All of this shows that Haredim today are not really Haredim, okay? They're not ideologically Haredim. The classic Haredi ideology is that who is the government to tell us who our rabbi is? Okay, they didn't accept Rav Kook. They didn't agree with Rav Kook, and no government would tell them that Rav Kook would be their rabbi if he didn't represent them, if they didn't agree with his opinions. Okay, and I think you should admit the truth wherever it's found. The classic Haredi ideology was correct. Okay, the way of Torah is not for the government to decide who your rabbi is. And on this, maybe the Haredim were right, perhaps more than Rav Kook. We'll stop there now with the historical stuff. And we'll go now to a very important text. Okay? I will be totally honest with you. I had to limit myself in terms of texts to those texts which I could find online in English. A lot of Rav Kook has been translated into Hebrew, but with the coronavirus, it's not accessible. Right? I tried once to go to the University of Haifa to the library, and it's absolutely insane. Okay, I don't want to exactly explain what it's like to try to go to the campus nowadays, but to make a long story short, to try to do scanning English translations of Rav Kook is simply impossible. Okay, so what I did was I consulted people online, and I looked for things online, and there were two essays that I really, really wanted to do with you. One of which I found. Okay, the other one is an essay called Ma'amar Hador, which is possibly the most fundamental essay that Rav Kook wrote. Ma'amar Hador means the essay for the generation. Might not sound like much to you, but think about what it means. Rav Kook wrote an essay, okay, about what the modern generation of Jews is, what it fundamentally is. Who are these people? Who are these Jews who on the one hand are rebelling against traditional Judaism with a vengeance, and on the other hand are sacrificing their very lives to build a Jewish home in the land of Israel? Who is this generation? What is this generation? That is an essay which has been translated into English. It was the first essay I wanted to do with you, but I could not get it, okay? But the second essay I did find. Not only did I find it, I found it in an absolutely outstanding and high quality translation. And it's the text that we have here. So I was good for 1 out of 2 in terms of the results. Now, what is this that we're seeing here on the screen? Rav Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Kook, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, the lamentation in Jerusalem. Okay, Hamisped B'Yerushalayim. What is Hamisped? What is Lehaspid? It's to give a eulogy. Okay, when someone dies. Guess who died? Theodor Herzl. Oh, you see it there right in the introduction. I think what we'll do is I'll ask a volunteer to begin to read this. We'll read the background very quickly. The background is important. All right, so maybe I'll stand in front of the screen and read. Maybe that. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, we have a question here in Kilat HaKerem. Was Theodor Herzl religious? Okay, that's exactly what this lamentation, what this eulogy is about. How does a person like Rav Kook eulogize a person like Herzl? Herzl was seen as almost a god, okay, by so many millions of Jews. Okay, Herzl created the Zionist movement that Rav Kook so deeply believed in, and yet Rav Kook had a big disagreement with Herzl. The disagreement was not only about keeping the mitzvot, the commandments, not about, in quotes, being religious, not just about that. It was about that. Okay, Herzl was an assimilated Jew. Herzl's view of Zionism was completely secular, okay? And the debate was about that, but it wasn't only about that. It was about something much deeper. It was about what I mentioned before, about the religious Zionists who supported Herzl's Uganda plan, who said that Zionism is politics. Zionism is practical. Zionism is about this world and not the next world, and not the Messianic age. Okay? That's where Rav Kook's conflict with Zionism is at its deepest. With Herzl's kind of Zionism, I mean, is at its deepest. So I hope the phone has charged somewhat. No, it hasn't.
You can sit here. You can turn off the sound there.
Okay.
Put the sound on this, and you can sit here.
Okay. So I'm gonna. What Don suggested is that I turn the sound off here. I mute. I'll go to his computer and read it from there. Okay. So I'm muting. Hello.
You're on mute, okay, and I'm gonna put on the, just a moment. I need to put on my,
You just need to click right here. If you just click here, you get. So minimize that. There you go.
no, I need
You
to,
want to trade?
well, to put you, the thing is I took off the picture. Just a moment. That's not off over there. You need to turn off the sound over there. All right. Okay, so the volume is going on here. And just make sure that,
Oh, no, you need to minimize, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me sit here.
Right.
And if you can skip over to someone else. Okay. Okay, can people see me and hear me? Unmute. I'm trying to unmute.
Yes,
Okay, there, got it. Can people see me and hear me now?
yes.
Okay. I can get it done. I can get it. What I will do now is begin to read, okay? On the 20th of Tammuz, 5664, July 3rd, 1904, Dr. Theodor Herzl, founder of the Zionist movement, died at the tragically young age of 44. Rav Avram Yitzchak Kook, the newly installed rabbi of the port city of Jaffa, was asked to participate in a memorial service to honor the departed leader. Rav Kook was placed in a difficult situation for which there was no totally satisfactory solution. On the one hand, the halacha is quite specific when it comes to those who have deviated from the norms of the Torah. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, wow. I didn't realize what I was doing. Okay. Whoever succeeds from the way of the community, whoever deviates, in other words, namely persons who throw off the yoke of commandments from upon their neck and do not participate with the Jewish people in their observances, in honoring the festivals and sitting in the synagogue and study house, but rather are free to themselves as the other nations, meaning they behave like other nations. So too the apostates and reformers, for none of these persons does one mourn. In other words, it is forbidden to give a eulogy. Rather, their brothers and other relatives wear white festive garments and eat and drink and make merry, because when a sinner dies, it's a good thing. Was Herzl a sinner? Did he violate the Shabbat? Yeah. Did he eat pork? Yeah. Okay. We can come up probably with lots of good sins, juicy sins that Herzl did. So are you allowed to eulogize Herzl? However one might lionize Herzl, there was no getting away from the fact that his lifestyle was that of an assimilated Jew, far from observance of traditional Judaism. If one were to adhere literally to the passage in Shulchan Aruch, the customary hesped or eulogy for the deceased would be out of the question. On the other hand, Rav Kook knew his flock. If in Jaffa itself Rav Kook might find a few individuals capable of relating to the halachic objection to memorializing a declaredly secular Jew, in Rehovot and the other outlying settler communities, Herzl, with his patriarchal beard and searing eyes, was regarded as nothing less than a modern-day prophet. And Rav Kook had been engaged not only as the rabbi of Jaffa, but of the recently established moshavot, settlements, colonies, as well. As their rabbi, he needs to eulogize Herzl. The last thing Rav Kook wanted was renewed bickering, or what is worse, full-blown controversy. Rav Kook, who had arrived in Jaffa from Europe not quite 2 months earlier, the 28th of Iyar, a couple months before, was familiar with what had preceded him. Jaffa, not unlike the rest of Eretz Yisrael, was a community with a history of controversy. The solution, if you can call it that, Rav Kook arrived at was the following. He would speak at the memorial gathering, but at no time would he pay specific tribute to the deceased Dr. Herzl. In other words, he would speak in generalities. He wouldn't mention his name. As it turned out, Rav Kook's non-eulogy for Herzl is without doubt one of the most inspired and profound Spedim eulogies ever. The address operates on many levels simultaneously, biblical, Talmudic, Kabbalistic, as well as responding to the contemporary maelstrom of Jewish life. In other words, this eulogy, which wasn't really a eulogy, is the deepest eulogy that Theodor Herzl received. Okay, he starts with a quote.
I just have a question here.
Yes.
Was there no effort on the part of traditional Jews when they think about somebody who's passed away to differentiate between laws relating to God and laws relating to man, so that you could see maybe the moral side of the man, even if you didn't see the religious observant side of the man?
That is a great question, Jennifer. I'll just ask Don a favor, if you could bring my bottle of water. It's over there. Okay, that's a great question. The differentiation between secular and religious is a modern distinction. It's not a halachic distinction, right? You find in the Talmud this idea of between humans and God, which you mentioned, but the distinction is not an ethical one. In other words, if you are disloyal to a person, that's bad, right? It's immoral. If you're disloyal to God, it's also bad. It's also immoral. It's not religious. Okay? It's a distinction that does not exist in the pre-modern Torah. It exists for us maybe today. I think what you're asking, Jennifer, is a little bit deeper than that even. That in modern times, you suddenly have Jews who are proud to be Jews, and their Jewishness is important to them, and they may even contribute a lot to the Jewish community. And yet, at the very same time, they do not keep the traditions of the community. That is something that did not exist in pre-modern times. In pre-modern times, if you publicly violated the Sabbath, you were not considered part of the Jewish community, and that was understood. The person who publicly violated the Sabbath wanted to divorce himself from the community, wanted to leave the community. And the way he declared it was by violating the Sabbath. In modern times, that changed. There is a tshuva, a response of Rabbi David Zvi Hoffman, who was a contemporary of Rav Kook. He was dealing with the same reality. The question was, but why don't we leave it as it was? Can we leave it as it was? Don is going around, he's dealing with the acoustics.
Sound like whatever it is.
So I'm just going to continue as we were. So Rav Tzvi Hoffman was asked the following question. In the Talmud, the halacha is that if a Jew publicly desecrates the Sabbath, then the Jew is no longer really part of the Jewish community, as I said before. The question is that in Germany, you had Jews who would say the Kiddush at home. We're probably talking about Reform Jews. They would say the Kiddush at home. They would declare that God created the heavens and the earth. And then the next day, they would proceed to violate the Sabbath publicly. Okay? That reality never existed before. So Rav David Zvi Hoffman said that once upon a time when Jews publicly desecrated the Sabbath, they were declaring their will no longer to be Jews. That is no longer the case. And so the halacha no longer is that if you publicly violate the Sabbath, that you're not considered part of the community. Okay? Rav Kook could have done a similar thing. He could have found a halachic reason why these rules do not apply to Herzl. But he chose not to do that. Instead, he chose to give the eulogy that we're about to read, which in a real sense is much deeper than what Rav David Zvi Hoffman did. Okay. On that day, the lamentation will be great in Jerusalem, like the lamentation of Hadad Rimon in the valley of Megiddo. Okay, this is a quotation you can see from Zechariah. And here we have lamentation in Jerusalem for the man of Jerusalem, for the Zionist, Theodor Herzl. The sages said that Jonathan ben Uziel translated the prophets into Aramaic, and the land of Israel trembled for an area of 400 parasangs by 400 parasangs. There was some kind of tremor or earthquake in the wake of his translation. This is the translation that is called Targum, okay, the Aramaic translation of the prophets. The Talmud says that a voice went out from heaven and said to Jonathan ben Uziel, "Why have you revealed the secrets of heaven in your translation?" I go back to the text. The reason for the disturbance was that contained in the prophets are things which are not explicit but veiled, things which are hidden, namely this verse that he quoted above. As Rav Yosef said there in the Talmud, were it not for its Aramaic translation, one would not know to what the verse refers. What is the lamentation of Hadad Rimon in the valley of Megiddo? The sages report that Jonathan ben Uziel stood up on his feet and declared, "It is I who revealed your mysteries to man. He who spoke and the world came into being knows full well that I did this neither for my honor nor for the honor of my father's house, but only that controversy not proliferate in Israel." What is the controversy? We should inquire, what was the veiled reference contained in this verse that was revealed by Jonathan's paraphrase, like the lamentation for Ahav or Ahab, son of Omri, who was killed by Hadad Rimon, son of Tab Rimon, in Ramot Gilad. And like the lamentation for Yoshiyahu, son of Ammon, killed by Paro Necho in the valley of Megiddo. The explanation doesn't sound any clearer than the verse, right? Furthermore, how did the revelation of this divine mystery prevent proliferation of controversy? Now, our sages said this lamentation will be for Messiah, son of Joseph, who is killed. You know, we've all heard of the Messiah, son of David. Who the heck is the Messiah, son of Joseph? The text says the entire concept of two Messiahs, Messiah, son of Joseph, and Messiah, son of David, requires explanation. Why the need for two Messiahs when the goal is to have one man preside over the entire Jewish nation? As it says, and David my servant shall be prince unto them forever. The ideal is to have one king, and for that king to be the son of David. So why in the world should the sages of the Talmud talk about having Messiah, the son of Joseph? I don't know if any of you have ever heard of this idea. Perhaps some of you have. The Messiah, son of Joseph, another Messiah, not from the house of David. Rav Kook Davka quotes this idea from the Talmud in his eulogy to Herzl. His father's name was, someone here said, someone in Kilat Akira, Miriam said that Jesus' father's name was Joseph, except that wasn't really his father. He was born of a virgin. So, I don't know. You know, it just shows you how non-materialistic Christians are, that in order to be a descendant of David, your father doesn't even have to be involved in the act. All right? But to get back to our topic, this is not the son of Joseph from the Gospels. This is the son of Joseph, the son of Jacob, the son of Israel. Okay? Back to the text. The key to understanding this dichotomy meaning Messiah, son of Joseph versus Messiah, son of David, lies in examining the individual human being, each and every one of us. God created in man a body and a soul, and corresponding to them, forces that strengthen and develop the body, as well as forces that strengthen and cultivate the soul. Ultimate wholeness is achieved when the body is strong and well developed, and the soul, vital and cultivated, leads all the faculties of the body in the service of the intellect, which is God's will in his world. This already bears some discussion related to Rav Kook's life. I neglected to mention to you that one of Rav Kook's earliest teachers, when he was, I think, a teenager, was noted not only for his Torah scholarship, but that he was really, a gever. He was a very well-built man. He was very strong, I guess, very, sports. And Don says that the Rambam also says that you need a healthy body in order to have a healthy intellect and soul. Oh, the Rambam stresses the intellect, and Rav Kook also refers to that here. But first of all, the point at hand. The point at hand is that this influenced Rav Kook. Rav Kook throughout his entire lifetime emphasized how Jews need to be healthy not only in their souls, but also to have healthy bodies. In other words, to do sports is a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah that I should do more often. And he mentions this here in his eulogy for Herzl. You need to cultivate the body, and you need to cultivate the soul, which he identifies here with the intellect. And yes, Don, Rav Kook also, how shall we say it? he was very cognizant of Maimonides' philosophy, and he tried to reconcile it with Jewish mysticism. Just like he tries to reconcile the Hasidim and their opponents, he also tried to reconcile Maimonides and his opponents, which may be a slight echo of that here. I'm back to the text smack in the middle. So on the collective level of Israel, not just each individual body and soul, but the nation, God ordained these two faculties. A faculty corresponding to the physical entity that aspires to material improvement of the nation, and a second facet devoted to the cultivation of spirituality. By virtue of the first aspect, Israel is comparable to all the nations of the world. In other words, as physical people, we're just like anybody else. It is by dint of the second aspect that Israel is unique, as it says. The Lord leads Israel alone, and among the nations Israel shall not be reckoned. It is the Torah and the unique sanctity of Israel that distinguish Israel from the nations. Originally, these two faculties, meaning the physical and the spiritual, were assigned to the two tribes destined to rule Israel, Ephraim on the one hand, the son of Joseph, and Judah, father of David, which is another way of saying Joseph and Judah. The deeds of the father are assigned to the sons, okay? Just like you had Joseph versus Judah, so too in our day, we also have the part of the nation which reflects Joseph and the part of the nation which reflects Judah. Just as in the beginning, Joseph was the provider of physical needs, food, sent by God to save many from starvation, who sustained Jacob and his sons materially when they came to Egypt looking for grain. So in future generations, the descendants of Joseph would develop the material side of Jewish national existence. Joseph, on the other hand, is paradigmatic in other ways as well. Joseph was swallowed up by the nations. In other words, he wasn't recognizable as a Jew. Think of our friend Theodore Herzl. He was also fluent in 70 languages. He was well educated in the secular realm. Okay, 70 languages sounds like a lot. It's meant, the idea means that he knew lots of languages and he was conversant with the wisdom of the world. This last point symbolizes the contiguity between Israel and all the nations of the world. The way Jews are like other people. They're like other people in secular education, okay? They look like other people. They dress like other people. Despite this, Joseph knew the power of his holiness. He never forgot where he came from. He never forgot that he was a Jew. It is for this reason that Esau succumbs to the children of Rachel, i.e. Joseph. Okay, the reason that the Jacob is able to overcome Esau is because he remembers the power of holiness. As the adage goes, the axe that fells the forest is made of wood. In other words, the physical side of the Jewish people, the wood, is what lets them stand up to the forest. Judah, on the other hand, symbolizes that which is distinctive about the Jewish people. Judah became his sanctified one, Kadosh. Whereas of Joseph, the psalmist says, Shiloh, a tent pitched among men. In other words, among other people and like other people. That's in Ephraim. That's in the area of Joseph. The purpose of choosing the kingdom of David was that these two faculties be integrated, that they not cancel, but rather reinforce one another. we find an interesting comment of the Midrash regarding the person of David. David was of ruddy complexion, just as Esau was ruddy, the difference being that David had handsome eyes, symbolizing he would only execute only with the permission of the Sanhedrin, meaning he would only put people to death if the Sanhedrin agreed. In other words, David has both the physical element. He's red, he's earthy, like Esau, but his eyes are turned towards the Torah. Written large, David's kingdom should have been the collection of the material powers necessary for a great and mighty kingdom, coupled with its spiritual excellence. It should have all come together. Unfortunately, sins brought about that Israel rejected the Davidic dynasty, whereby the nation was divided in two. The 10 tribes subsumed under Ephraim, which is in reality Joseph, and the 2 tribes subsumed under Judah. Usually we describe these 2 kingdoms as the kingdom of Israel versus the kingdom of Judah. But the kingdom of Israel is very often called in the Bible Ephraim, okay, the son of Joseph. Were it not for this split, all would have been united under the tree of Judah. In other words, the Davidic dynasty should have been kings over all 12 tribes. The psalmist gave expression to this vision of unity. He will subdue peoples under us and nations under our feet. He will choose for us our inheritance, the excellence of Jacob, which he loves, Selah. By gathering together these 2 powers, both would benefit. The material would be rarefied and sanctified by its exposure to the unique sanctity of Israel. And the spiritual would be invigorated bodily to enhance Israel. Eventually, the rays would light up the entire world, the rays of the light of a healthy body with a healthy soul, a healthy physical national existence together with spiritual existence. This will be the case in the future in the Messianic redemption. And that shall happen on that day. At the root of Jesse shall stand as an ensign of the peoples. To him shall nations inquire, and his resting place shall be glorious. No longer shall there be war between 2 factions within Israel, but rather complete peace. That is the greatest honor. That is what should have been. And it was for a moment, but it was not to last. Our sins brought about the division of the kingdom, and these 2 powers that should have been united developed each in its own way, oblivious of its companion. Due to our many sins, both of the faculties were greatly damaged. That's a very important sentence, and when we meet next week, I think we're going to greatly expand on what he hints at in this sentence. Both faculties were damaged. In other words, a healthy body cannot be truly healthy without a healthy soul. So too, a healthy soul cannot be truly healthy without a healthy body. Let's think for a minute before we go on in the reading. Let's think for a minute about Jewish existence for nearly 2,000 years until the rise of Zionism. Would you say that existence was mostly a physical existence or a spiritual existence? How would you react to that question? What do people say? Well, Marion here says that it was both because, the Jews have to be living as live bodies, right, in order to have a spiritual existence. Of course, Of course it has to be both. And yet one thing predominated. Did the Jews enjoy a physical existence like other nations did? No. They didn't live in their land. They didn't live together. They were persecuted. Okay? The body of national existence was absent to them. What mostly remained? The spiritual side. The study of Torah and keeping the commandments is something that characterized Jews for nearly 2,000 years. Okay? In other words, the Jews lived a mostly spiritual existence for 2,000 years. Both of the faculties were greatly damaged. The bodily faculty was damaged. We can understand how that was. But how was the spiritual faculty damaged if Jews are keeping the Torah and studying the Torah? Okay? That's something we're going to deal with a lot next week. Okay? But be aware already to get you ready for next week that Rav Kook said something that very few traditional rabbis could or would say. He thought that just like we call a weak and damaged body, we call it sick, he thought that the Torah of the Jewish people was sick. We're going to talk about what that means next week. How can the Torah be sick? Let's, for now, though, go back to the text. The kingdom of Ephraim, the northern kingdom, was founded by Jeroboam, who was appointed by Solomon over the task force of Joseph in appreciation for his practical talent. Turned its back on Israel's unique sanctity. In me you have thrown behind your back. They do the physical building of the temple. And this was the source of the sin of idolatry. It developed in time into Israel's ongoing aping of the nation's negative traits. This is like Joseph being unrecognizable. At its nadir, it was said, Ephraim is assimilated among the peoples. Ephraim is a cake readily devoured. Judah, deprived of the material side that enlivens, was in need of a spiritual supplement to replace the missing material aspect. Unable to rise to the occasion, the spiritual power was also ruined. Judah too shall stumble with them. Even after the separation, the wound might have healed, had the two sides realized that though each has its own propensity, they might benefit from one another. In other words, you need both tribes, both sides. Judah could receive from Ephraim ways to round the nation in terms material and universal. Ephraim could imbibe from Judah the ways of holiness unique to Israel, be they Torah, character development, or prophetic ability. The political reality, however, made no such allowance. Were this mutual cooperation to come about, the dominant side would have been the spiritual, for it is the soul that vivifies the body. This is precisely what Yerovam did not wish to occur. Our wise men summed it up in an anecdote. Holy One, blessed be he, grabbed Yerovam by his garment and said to him, repent, and I and you and the son of Jesse, meaning David, will stroll together in the Garden of Eden. Yerovam asked, who will lead? The Holy One replied, the son of Jesse, Yishai, will lead. In other words, David will lead, not you. Sniffed Yerovam. If so, I am not interested. If the body refuses to give prominence to the soul, right, then the body wants nothing to, in that case, nothing to do with the soul. Yeah.
This is,
Yeah.
expression of this. It's certain archetypes within the Jewish body. It's not, we don't identify one part of the Jewish people. David.
Well, wait a minute. We don't?
That's what I'm asking.
Until modern times, there was no way to do that. You couldn't make this identification because all of the Jewish communities, one second, all of the Jewish communities in pre-modern times studied the Torah and kept the commandments. Now Rav Kook is saying that we're having a split reminiscent of the original split between Israel and Judah. Okay? You have the Jews who represent the physical side, and you have the Jews who represent the spiritual side. It does have real physical representations. A Merkava tank represents, yeah. So John said, no, it's pre-state, so use the Haggadah, use Irgun HaShomer. Okay. I'll paraphrase what Don is saying. For 2,000 years, this distinction didn't exist. Rav Kook would say that mostly the spiritual side was reflected for 2,000 years, but that side also was sick. Okay, we'll explain next week what that means. And in modern times, you have this dichotomy between the Jews building the physical side, building the moshavim, building the kibbutzim, carrying guns, planting crops, versus the Jews building the spiritual side, studying the Torah, keeping the commandments. You don't find too many people doing both. Okay, in other words, what Kook is saying that Jews in his time, Jews in modernity, are going back to the original split between Israel and Judah. Okay, Marian says, well, there were religious Jews who helped build Zionism, and it's true. There were, and there still are. But as a generalization, okay, most of the people building the state of Israel, that eventually became the state of Israel, were not traditional Jews.
But their parents were.
Okay, what?
Their grandparents were.
Yeah, so in back of me, people are saying, yeah, but their grandparents were all rabbis. That was a famous quote in Israel. The secular Israelis love to say, my grandfather was a rabbi. Okay, and it's true. But they themselves no longer were. That's the difference between what Don said and then Rav Kook's generation, right? That's the breakdown. Now, let's go back to the text. God offered that together, David and Yerovam bring the Jewish people to its goal of a nation concentrated to the Lord God of Israel, while being worthy of being a light to the nations. There would be room within the overall structure for the universalist dimension represented by Yerovam's kingdom. Notice that universalism for him is not spiritual, it's physical. It's what all the different nations share. Everybody plants crops. Everybody eats. Everybody exercises. Everybody builds. But to the question, who is at the helm? The answer must be the son of Jesse, Yishai, is at the helm. Without the recognition of the supremacy of the spiritual side, for the portion of the Lord is his people, Jacob is a lot of his inheritance, heaven forfend, Israel's destiny would be lost. Israel is the smallest among the nations, and God forbid, most likely to disappear if Israel does not preserve the spiritual side. Yeroboam's ego stood in the way. If so, he said, I'm not interested. This set into motion a long chain of calamities, culminating in Israel's exile until the end of days. Okay. This is the end of a section. We could read a little bit more, but I'd like to first ask if there's questions or comments on what we did so far about this archetypical dichotomy that he's drawing between the Jews who represent the physical side versus the Jews who represent the spiritual side. In the ideal world, he says, they both need to be together and the spiritual needs to live. He also says that when they are split, both suffer. Okay? The Torah is sick without the spiritual side, and the national physical body is sick without the spiritual side. Reactions to this? Any reactions? Okay, we have a reaction. I'll say it over after I hear it. Right. Oh, okay. Brian says, look, he says, we once had a physical temple and we offered physical sacrifices. We slaughtered sheep and goats, right? And bulls. That's a very physical thing. What happened? When Jerusalem was destroyed, the temple gets replaced with prayer. And the only homeland Jews have after that is the synagogue. Okay? Oh, and Brian adds one more thing, yeah? Okay. To what I said about the sacrifices being very physical as opposed to the prayer in the synagogue. So Brian adds that Rav Kook was known as a vegetarian. I'll correct that a little bit. Rav Kook wrote a famous essay. Maybe we'll conclude with this for today because it's an interesting idea and a nice idea. He wrote a very famous essay called Chazon HaTzimchonut VeHaShalom, the vision of vegetarianism and peace. That's the name of his essay. And in that essay, he presents vegetarianism as an ideal. He says that in Eden, which represents the ideal world, people did not eat meat. Later on, the Torah allowed the eating of meat, but it's still not a value. It's still not a thing to be striven for. I will correct, though, that even though Rav Kook wrote this essay, even though Rav Kook saw being vegetarian as an ideal, he himself was not a vegetarian. He did eat meat, okay? Because he thought we're not there yet. Okay, that in the ideal world, in the Messianic age, this cruelty will be prevented. Okay, but maybe in our age, there are more important things to do before refraining from eating animal flesh. Maybe there's more important steps that need to be taken before doing that. But I think the example Brian gave of the sacrifices and the prayer and the vegetarianism, they have a lot to do with what Rav Kook is talking about. Okay, he even mentions it explicitly in what we already read, right? That it was Joseph that built the physical temple in Jerusalem. Okay, so sacrifice and temple represent the physical side. And this is what the Jews lost when they went out into exile, and they had to mostly comfort themselves with the spiritual side, even though, and I emphasize this is going to be so crucial next week, even though the spiritual side is also damaged, is also sick, because it does not have a healthy body. It does not have its own land. It does not have its own army. It does not have its own farms. It does not have its own towns. It does not have its own capital called Jerusalem. And it does not have its own temple. All of those things were missing, which meant that even the spiritual soul that existed in exile was highly lacking and quite weak and sickly, okay? And next week we'll go into what that means. What does it mean for the Torah to be sick? Okay, in the mind of Rav Kook. Okay, I'll just conclude by going back to his biography. Think what his opponents thought when he gave this eulogy. When he eulogized Herzl in Jerusalem, despite the fact that the halakha says that you cannot eulogize a sinner and a public Sabbath violator. And when he eulogized him, I don't know if all of you got this, but let's pay attention to him now. When he eulogized him, he called him the Messiah. Did anybody pick up on that? In the passage that we read so far, he's hinting that, that Herzl is the Messiah ben Joseph. Okay? He's one of the two messianic figures spoken about in the passage that was cited. Okay? But he's distinguishing it from other aspects, which he says that Herzl did not represent. Okay, we'll have to stop here. If we do it by Skype, you know, we can go over a little bit. But now I'm back in Kilat Akerim. I got to catch the bus again. Okay, so I apologize for the technical problems, which were partially caused by my equipment. And hopefully next week I'll get my computer checked out in the meantime, and it will all go down good. Have a great week, everybody.
Thank you, Abby.
You too, Abby. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby.
Thank you, Avi. Bye.